My mother told 42 people at my grandmother's memorial lunch that my business partner had been quietly stealing from me for 3 years. She said it the way she said most cruel things, with a hand on her chest and her voice pitched just low enough that people had to lean in to catch the details. She said she was worried about me. She said she didn't know how to tell me, but the family deserved to know. What she did not say, what she had known for 4 years and 7 months, was that my business partner was also my husband. His name was Daniel Reese. He was sitting 12 feet from her when she said it, holding a paper plate with a piece of lemon cake on it, and she looked right through him like he was part of the wallpaper. I was standing by the coffee urn when I heard her. I did not spill my coffee. I did not set the cup down. I took one slow sip and I watched my mother's mouth move, and I understood for the first time in 31 years exactly what kind of woman had raised me. My name is Hadley Marsh. I was born in a small Ohio town called Millbrook, the kind of place where everyone knew your mother's maiden name and half of them remembered your father's funeral. If you're listening to this story and any part of it feels familiar, please hit that like button and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like mine. Now let me take you back to how it started, because to understand what happened at that memorial, you have to understand what kind of daughter my mother had decided I was going to be 28 years before that lemon cake ever hit a plate. My father died when I was 3. A stroke on a Tuesday morning. He was 41 years old. I don't remember him, not really. I remember a shape in a doorway and the smell of Old Spice, and a pair of hands that used to lift me over puddles. My mother remarried when I was 5. His name was Carter Voss. He sold insurance. He was a big man with a laugh that filled a room and a way of not quite looking at me when he spoke. They had my sister Presley a year later. From the day Presley came home from the hospital, I understood my job. I was the practice child. Presley was the real one. My mother, Marlene, had a gift for making favoritism look like fairness. If Presley broke something, it was because she was spirited. If I broke something, it was because I was careless. If Presley got a B, the teacher was hard on her. If I got an A, I should have gotten an A+. By the time I was 10, I had learned to go quiet. Quiet meant safe. Quiet meant the pot roast stayed on the table and nobody's wine glass got refilled too fast. Carter never hit me. Carter never yelled at me. Carter just looked at me sometimes the way a man looks at a dog that belongs to the neighbors, polite, detached, slightly inconvenienced. I figured out in middle school that the way to survive the Voss house was to become useful and invisible at the same time. I did the dishes without being asked. I helped Presley with her homework. I stayed out of every photograph where I could. I went to Ohio State on a full academic scholarship because my mother told me the family couldn't afford to send 2 daughters to college and Presley's grades were borderline and she would need the help more. I was 18. I believed her. I worked 3 jobs through school. I graduated with a business degree and $400 in my checking account and a quiet, patient anger I had not yet named. I met Daniel in the last semester of my senior year, in a night class on small business finance. He was 26, 3 years older than me, already working as a junior accountant at a firm in Columbus. He had dark hair that fell into his eyes when he took notes and a way of asking questions in class that made the professor stop and actually think. After the 3rd class, he asked if I wanted to get coffee. 2 years later, we were married in a courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon with his sister Rhea as our witness. My mother was not there. She told me on the phone 2 weeks before the wedding that she and Carter were taking Presley to look at colleges in Florida that weekend and they couldn't change the trip. I said okay, Mom. I did not cry. I had stopped crying in front of my mother when I was 12. Daniel held my hand at the courthouse and told me I looked beautiful, and we ate Thai food out of takeout containers on the floor of his apartment because we didn't have a table yet, and it was one of the happiest days of my entire life. My mother sent a card a month later. It said, "Congratulations on the marriage. Hope it lasts." She had written it in her cheerful loopy handwriting, the same handwriting she used for Christmas cards. I kept it. I still have it. I don't know why. Daniel and I started Marsh and Reese Consulting in the spring of 2021. We were 27 and 30. We had $6,000 in savings, a used laptop, and a two-bedroom apartment in Columbus where the second bedroom was our office. We specialized in small business accounting and operations consulting for family-run restaurants and retail shops, the kind of places that were good at what they did and terrible at spreadsheets. Daniel handled the books. I handled the client relationships and the operations side. By the end of year 1 we had 12 clients. By the end of year 2, we had 34, and we had moved into a real office in a converted warehouse off High Street. By year 3, we had 7 employees, a book of 91 active clients, and a projected revenue of $1.4 million. My name was on the door. Daniel's name was on the door. Our marriage certificate was in a file cabinet in the back office. Our joint tax returns were in the same cabinet. Our W-2s from the business were in the same cabinet. There was no secret here. There had never been a secret here. My mother had known since 2020. Here's what nobody in Millbrook, Ohio knew about Hadley Marsh. They did not know I owned a business. They did not know I was married. They did not know my husband's name. They did not know because my mother had, over a period of 4.5 years, carefully and deliberately told them a different story. In her story, I was a struggling girl in Columbus who worked in an office doing data entry. In her story, Daniel was a boyfriend, maybe, if I was lucky. In her story, Presley was the one who had her life together, Presley the dental hygienist with the nice apartment and the boyfriend whose father owned a car dealership. My mother had made her choice about which daughter's story was worth telling at church suppers and Christmas gatherings long before I knew there was a choice to be made. I found out the shape of it in pieces over the years, from a cousin who called once to ask how my, quote, entry-level position was going, from a great-aunt who sent me a card congratulating me on landing a real job. I corrected them gently. I did not make a scene. I did not call my mother to ask her why. I figured, in the way people raised by Marlene boss figure things, that correcting her in front of her friends would only make my life harder. So I let the lie breathe in Millbrook and I built my real life in Columbus, and I thought, for a long time, that the two could stay separate. My grandmother Ruth died in the middle of September. She was my father's mother, 84 years old, a widow for the last 16 years. She lived in a small clapboard house on the edge of Millbrook with a vegetable garden and a black cat named Judge. Ruth was the one person in my family who had never treated me like a spare part. When I was 8, she taught me to make pie crust from scratch, and she had told me, flour on her cheek, that a good crust was a matter of not overworking it, and that most things in life were the same way. When I was 16, she had slipped me $100 in an envelope and told me to buy myself something that wasn't practical. When I was 23 and had just met Daniel, she had driven 2 hours to Columbus to meet him at a diner, and she had held his hand across the table and told him that if he was good to me, she'd bake him a pie every birthday for the rest of his life. She had made good on that promise for 7 birthdays. Apple the first year, Peach the second. She had called me the morning of our courthouse wedding and cried happy tears. She had sent Daniel a card on our first anniversary with a $20 bill inside and a note that said, for Thai food. Love, Grandma Ruth. Daniel had kept the note in his wallet. He still has it. She died on a Wednesday. Pneumonia complications after a fall. I drove to Millbrook the next morning with Daniel in the passenger seat, and I cried for the first 100 miles, and Daniel held my hand on the center console and did not try to fix it. The funeral was small. Maybe 30 people. My mother wore black and cried at acceptable volumes. Carter stood beside her and kept checking his watch. Presley, 26 now, engaged to a man named Bo who owned a car dealership, sat in the front row in a black dress that was too short for a funeral. The memorial lunch was 3 days later at the Millbrook Community Hall. My mother had insisted on hosting it. She had told the extended family she would handle everything. She had not asked me to help. She had not asked Daniel to come. When I said Daniel and I would both be there, She had paused on the phone for a half-second longer than was natural, and she had said, "Oh, of course, honey. Of course Daniel can come." I should have heard it. I didn't. I had been trained since childhood not to hear the half-seconds in my mother's voice. The memorial lunch was on a Saturday, the kind of September afternoon where the sun comes in through community hall windows at an angle that makes everyone look older than they are. There were 42 people there. I counted later. Long folding tables with white paper tablecloths. Ham sandwiches and potato salad and 3 different casseroles brought by 3 different women from the Methodist Church. 2 urns, coffee and hot water for tea. A sheet cake with Ruth's name in yellow icing. Daniel and I arrived at 1 o'clock. I wore a navy dress my grandmother had helped me pick out when I was 25. Daniel wore the gray suit he had bought for our 3rd wedding anniversary. We walked in together. I held his hand. A cousin I had not seen in 6 years, Melanie, hugged me and told me she was so sorry, and then she looked at Daniel and said, "And you must be," and trailed off. I said, "This is Daniel, my husband." Melanie's face did a small, careful thing. She said, "Oh. Oh, of course. Of course." And then she moved toward the sandwiches. I looked at Daniel. Daniel did not look at me. Daniel had already scanned the room and was looking at my mother, who was standing near the coffee urn with 3 women from the church, and my mother was looking at us, and she did not smile. The first hour was quiet. People came up to me and told me stories about my grandmother. An old neighbor named Mr. Grady told me about the time Ruth had brought him soup every day for a week when his wife was in the hospital. Pastor Holland told me Ruth had been the backbone of the Wednesday prayer group. Presley hugged me once, briefly, and said, "This is so hard," in the voice she used when she wanted the hug to be visible to whoever was watching. Carter shook Daniel's hand with the firm, fast, dismissive handshake of a man who had decided 20 years ago that Daniel was not worth remembering. Daniel was gracious. Daniel was always gracious. He had grown up with a warm family, 2 loving parents and 3 sisters who texted him every day, and he had never quite believed, even after 7 years of watching it, that my family was as cold as it actually was. He kept expecting the pivot, the moment my mother would soften, the moment Carter would unbend. He had a generous heart, my husband. It was one of the reasons I had married him. It was also, on that Saturday afternoon in September, about to be the thing my mother tried to use against me. I was at the coffee urn refilling my cup when I heard it. My mother was 3 feet to my left, and she had her voice pitched low the way she did in church, and she was talking to a woman named Barbara Linton who had been her friend since high school. I have known Barbara Linton my entire life. She used to bring me lollipops when she came to the house. Barbara was holding a paper plate, and my mother had her hand on Barbara's forearm, and my mother was saying, "I just don't know how to help her, Barb. She's such a sweet girl. She always has been. But you know what I heard from a friend in Columbus? That boy she's with, Daniel, the one who calls himself her business partner? He's been taking money out of her business for years. 3 years, Barb. I don't even know how to tell her. She thinks the sun rises and sets on him." Barbara made a small, horrified sound. "Oh, Marlene. Oh, no." My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin. "I've been sick about it. Ruth knew. Ruth tried to talk to me about it before she passed. I don't know what to do. Hadley's so trusting. She always has been. I thought maybe after the funeral, when things settle, I could try to sit her down and tell her what I know." Barbara squeezed her arm. "You're a good mother, Marlene. You've always been such a good mother." I did not move. I did not look at my mother. I took one slow sip of my coffee. The coffee was lukewarm and had been brewed too strong. I could hear my own heartbeat in my left ear. I turned my head 1 careful inch to the right and I looked across the room at Daniel. Daniel was standing by the window, holding that paper plate with the lemon cake, talking to Pastor Holland about something, nodding politely. He had not heard. He would not hear, because my mother had timed it for when he was 12 feet away. I understood in that moment, in a way I had never quite let myself understand before, that my mother was not a difficult woman. My mother was not a cold woman. My mother was not a woman who loved one daughter more than the other. My mother was a woman who had just, on the day of her former mother-in-law's memorial, looked for the right audience and then slandered my husband to that audience because she thought she could get away with it. Because she had been getting away with things my entire life. Because the version of me she had built in her head 31 years ago was a girl who went quiet when she was hurt, and the girl who went quiet could be counted on not to make a scene. I turned back to the urn. I set my cup down. I did not make a scene. Not yet. I walked, very slowly, the long way around the room, past the sandwich table, past the sheet cake, past my cousin Melanie who was now whispering with another cousin in the corner and had gone noticeably silent when I walked by. I walked to Daniel. I put my hand on the small of his back. I smiled at Pastor Holland and said, "Would you excuse us for a moment?" Pastor Holland smiled and said of course. I led Daniel to the hallway outside the main room, past the coat rack, to the small vestibule by the side door where we could see the parking lot through a single narrow window. Daniel said, "Hey. Hey, what's wrong? You're shaking." I was not shaking. My hands were steady. Something else was vibrating under my skin that had no name yet. I said, "Daniel, my mother just told Barbara Linton that you have been stealing from our business for 3 years." He stared at me. He said, "What?" And then he said, "Are you serious?" And then he said, very quietly, "Hadley. Your mother knows we're married. Your mother has known we were married for 4.5 years." I said, "Yes. I know." He said, "Your mother just in there. She told your mother's best friend that I was stealing from you?" I said, "Yes." Daniel looked at the narrow window. Then he looked at me. He said, "What do you want to do?" And that, right there, was the question that changed my life. Because for the first time in 31 years, I did not give my mother the answer I had been trained to give. I did not say, "Nothing. I don't want to make a scene." I said, "I want to go home and I want to think. And then I want to come back here and end this in front of every person she just performed for." Daniel drove. I sat in the passenger seat of our car in the parking lot of the Millbrook Community Hall, and I looked through the windshield at the red brick of the building where my mother was, at that exact moment, probably already moving on to the next person she could tell. My hands were folded in my lap. My wedding ring was on my left hand. The ring was a thin gold band with a small sapphire, Daniel's grandmother's ring, and it had been on that finger for 4 years and 7 months, and my mother had seen it on my finger every single time I had visited Millbrook in those 4 years and 7 months. She had seen it at Christmas 2021 when I came home for one afternoon. She had seen it at Presley's engagement party in 2023 when I drove 3 hours to be there and Marlene introduced me to Beau's parents as my older girl from Columbus and did not say the word husband. She had seen it at Grandma Ruth's 80th birthday party. She had seen it every time. Daniel started the engine. He did not pull out of the lot. He turned to me. He said, "Hadley. Tell me what you need." I said, "I need 20 minutes. I need to go somewhere quiet and think. And then I need to come back." He said, "Okay." He drove us to a coffee shop on Main Street, 2 blocks from the community hall, a place that had been a pharmacy when I was a kid. We sat in a corner booth. I ordered nothing. Daniel ordered 2 black coffees and brought them to the table. He said, "Talk to me." I said, "She knew. She has always known. She has known since the week we got married. I sent her the courthouse photo. I sent her the certificate. She has filed our joint Christmas card under the magnet on her refrigerator for 4 years. I saw it there at Easter." Daniel said, "I know." I said, "She is telling 42 people right now that you have been stealing from me because she thinks I won't correct her. Because she thinks the quiet daughter will stay quiet." Daniel said, "Why is she doing this, Hadley?" And I looked at him across the Formica table, and I understood the answer in the same way you understand a math problem you have been staring at for an hour. I said, "Because Presley's engagement is falling apart." If you're still with me in this story, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support genuinely means everything and helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. Now let me tell you what I had figured out in that booth. Presley's fiancé Beau, the car dealership heir, had been sending texts to a woman in Cincinnati for the last 6 months. Presley had found them in July. She had called me, one of maybe 4 times she had called me in our adult lives, and she had cried on the phone for 40 minutes. She had asked me what to do. I had told her she needed to decide whether she could trust him again, and that she did not have to decide tonight. She had told me she was going to talk to Mom. That was the last I had heard about it. What I realized in the coffee shop was that the engagement was on the rocks, and Presley, who had spent her entire adult life being introduced to the town as the successful one, the one with the nice life, was about to come home from Florida with a broken engagement and no job prospects and no plan. My mother, who had built her entire social identity in Millbrook around Presley's successful daughter narrative, needed a new story to tell the church ladies. She needed a distraction. She needed a crisis that was not Presley's crisis. And the easiest crisis to manufacture was the one my mother had been quietly building in the back of her mind for 4 years. My older girl got taken in by that man in Columbus. He's been stealing from her. I've known for years. I just didn't know how to tell her. It would keep Barbara Linton and the church ladies busy for a month. It would push Presley's problems out of the spotlight. And it would cost my mother nothing, because I, Hadley, the practice child, would not push back. I was the one who had never pushed back. I took my phone out of my purse. I opened my email. I scrolled back through my sent folder to November 2020, a few days after the courthouse. I found the email I was looking for. It was to my mother's Gmail address. The subject line was "Photos from Saturday." Attached was a photo of Daniel and me outside the courthouse holding a marriage certificate between us, both of us grinning like idiots. The body of the email said, "Mom, we did it." It was small and perfect. "Daniel wanted me to tell you he hopes to meet you soon. Love, Hadley." Below that, a forwarded confirmation from the Franklin County Recorder's Office. I showed Daniel the screen. He looked at it for a long moment. He said, "Forward it to yourself with today's date. Just in case." I did. Then I opened my Photos app. I scrolled back. Christmas 2021 in Millbrook, my mother and me on her couch, my wedding ring visible on my left hand. Presley's engagement party 2023, a group photo with Marlene's arm around my waist, my ring clearly visible. Easter 2024, a photo of the Christmas card on my mother's fridge, because I had noticed it was still up in April and had taken a picture to show Daniel, and we had laughed about it. I airdropped all of them to Daniel's phone. I said, "Back these up to the cloud." He did. I said, "I want the tax returns." Daniel looked at me. He said, "Our joint returns?" I said, "Yes. 2021, 2022, 2023. All 3. I want them on my phone as PDFs by the time I walk back through that door." Daniel said, "Give me 10 minutes." He opened his laptop bag, which he had left in the car and retrieved while I was sitting in the booth thinking. He logged into our tax software. He downloaded 3 years of joint returns. He airdropped them to my phone. I said, "One more thing. I want the 2021 email from her." Daniel said, "What email?" I said, "The one where she replied to the courthouse photos. She wrote back 3 days later. It was short. I want to find it." I searched my inbox. I found it. December 3, 2020. From Marlene Voss. Subject, Photos from Saturday. The message was 2 lines. It said, "Thank you for sending these, Hadley. Daniel seems like a nice young man. give our best to him. I screenshotted it. I airdropped the screenshot to Daniel. I said, save that. He said, saved. I said, okay. Let's go. We walked back into the community hall at 1:56. The lunch was still going. People were still eating. The coffee urn had been refilled. My mother was standing in the middle of the room holding court with a group of 6 women, and Barbara Linton was at her elbow, and I could see from the way Barbara was leaning in and nodding that the story had already traveled at least to Pastor Holland's wife, who was across the room whispering to a cousin of mine, who was whispering to her husband. The story was going through the room the way a small fire goes through dry grass. Slow, hot, and in every direction at once. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I did not walk in. Daniel stood behind me. His hand was at the small of my back. Carter was at the sandwich table. Carter saw me first. He straightened. He said something to the man standing next to him, a cousin on Carter's side named Wes. Carter put down his paper plate. He walked toward me. He said, voice low, Hadley. Everything all right? I looked at him. I said, Carter, do you know what my mother just told Barbara Linton about Daniel? Carter's face did something. It was the smallest movement, a tightening around the eyes, but I had spent 26 years watching that face, and I knew what the tightening meant. It meant he knew. It meant he had maybe known for hours, or days, or weeks, that Marlene was planning to say something at the memorial. It meant Carter had decided, as he had decided every year of my life, to stay out of it. He said, Hadley. This isn't the time. This is your grandmother's memorial. I said, Carter, that is exactly what she was counting on. I walked past him. Daniel followed. My mother saw me coming. She turned her head and she saw me, and she saw Daniel behind me, and her face did a thing I had never seen it do before. It went pale. Not pale like fear, not yet. Pale like a woman who has just realized she has misjudged the room. She said, loud, cheerful, Hadley, sweetheart, there you are. I was worried you'd gone home. I stopped about 6 feet away from her. The circle of women around her did not disperse. They just went quiet. Barbara Linton had a small nervous smile on her face. I looked at Barbara. I said, Barbara, my mother just told you that my business partner Daniel has been stealing from me for 3 years. Is that right? Barbara's mouth opened. She looked at my mother. She looked back at me. She said, oh, Hadley, honey, I don't. I'm sure she just. I said, Barbara. Yes or no? Is that what she told you? Barbara said, very small, yes. The room noticed. The nearest conversation stopped first. Then the tables nearest to those conversations. Then the whole room, in a slow rippling quiet, realized that something was happening at the coffee urn and turned toward it. My mother said, quick, warm, Hadley, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Barb and I were having a private conversation. Let's not. I said, Mom, you had it in a community hall full of 42 people at your mother-in-law's memorial. That is not a private conversation. That is a broadcast. My mother's smile wavered. Carter was now behind me, and I could hear him breathing through his nose the way he did when he was trying to intervene and did not know how. Presley was at the sheet cake. She had frozen with a piece of cake halfway to her mouth. Daniel stepped up beside me. He did not speak. He did not need to. He was just there, tall and steady in his gray suit, and his presence was the thing that was already starting to pull the room's attention. I took out my phone. I opened it to the screenshot of my mother's 2020 email. I held the phone up at chest height, screen facing my mother. I said, Mom, I want to read something out loud. This is an email you sent me on December 3, 2020, 3 days after Daniel and I got married at the Franklin County Courthouse. I sent you the marriage certificate and the photo. You wrote back, quote, thank you for sending these, Hadley. Daniel seems like a nice young man. Give our best to him. Unquote. I lowered the phone. The room made a sound. It was not a word. It was 42 people inhaling at slightly different speeds. Barbara Linton took a step back from my mother. My mother said, "Hadley, you are making a scene. This is not the place." I said, "Mom, the place is the place you chose. You chose a room full of 42 people. You chose Grandma Ruth's memorial. You chose Barbara because you knew Barbara would tell every woman in her prayer circle by Monday. You chose all of this. I am just standing in the room you built." My mother's hand went to her pearl necklace. I had seen her do that 1,000 times. It was the gesture she did when she was about to cry on cue. I kept going before she could. I said, "Mom, I have been married to Daniel Reese for 4 years and 7 months. He is my husband. He is also my business partner. We founded Marsh and Reese Consulting together in 2021. Our business does $1.4 million a year. We have 7 employees. Our tax returns are filed jointly. Daniel's name is on the deed to our house. Daniel's name is on our retirement accounts. Daniel drove me to Grandma Ruth's hospital room the night she died, and he sat in the parking lot for 6 hours because Carter told him the room was only for family." Carter made a small sound behind me. I did not turn around. My mother said, "Hadley, that's enough." I said, "No, Mom. It is not enough. You just told Barbara Linton that Daniel has been stealing from me for 3 years. You knew he was my husband when you said that. You have known for 4 years and 7 months. You have sat across the table from him at Presley's engagement party. You have taken Christmas cards from our joint account. You have seen my wedding ring on my hand every time I have walked through your front door." I tapped my phone. I opened it to the photo of the Christmas card on her fridge. I turned the phone around so the room could see. Barbara Linton made a soft sound. My mother said, "Hadley, for God's sake, put that away." I said, "I took this picture in your kitchen at Easter 2024. The card is addressed from Hadley and Daniel Reese. You had it on your fridge for 4 months. You kept it, Mom. You kept our card on your fridge while you told Barbara Linton my husband was stealing from me." The room had gone completely silent. Pastor Holland had set down his plate. His wife was staring at my mother with an expression I had never seen her wear in church. Presley had put her cake down. Bo, who was visiting from Florida, had come out of the hallway where he had been taking a call. He was standing in the doorway with his phone at his side. He had not heard the beginning. He was hearing the middle. His face was confused. I said, "Mom, I want to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it in front of this room. Why did you say what you said to Barbara today?" My mother stared at me. She said, "Hadley, you are ambushing me at my mother-in-law's memorial. This is unforgivable." I said, "Mom, answer the question." She said, "I was concerned. I was concerned about you. A woman at my women's circle told me she had heard things about Daniel's firm. I was worried. I did not know how to tell you. I did not know what else to do." Daniel spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and clear. He said, "Marlene. Which woman at your women's circle? What is her name? What firm did she claim to have heard about? What are the details of what she told you?" My mother's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. She said, I don't remember her exact name. It was a friend of a friend." Daniel said, "Marlene, you just stood in this room and told Barbara Linton that I have been stealing from my wife for 3 years. If that is true, you have a source. Tell us the source." My mother said nothing. The silence went on for longer than silences are supposed to go on in a room full of people. Somebody, I think my cousin Melanie, coughed. Carter said, behind me, "Lo, Marlene. Say something." My mother turned her head toward Carter. She looked at him the way a drowning person looks at a lifeguard who is holding a sandwich. She said, Carter. Help me. Carter did not move. For the first time in 26 years, Carter did not move to help her. I understood in that moment that Carter had known all along exactly who my mother was, and that Carter had chosen, this one time, to let her stand in the consequence of her own sentence. I said, Mom. There is no woman at your women's circle. There is no friend of a friend. There is no source. You made it up. You made it up because Presley's engagement is in trouble and you needed the church ladies to talk about something else for a while. You made it up because you thought I would not push back. You have been counting on me not to push back since I was 10 years old. My mother's face crumpled. The tears started. They were real tears. I will give her that. She said, Hadley, how can you say that to me at your grandmother's memorial? Your grandmother is not even in the ground 3 days and you are doing this to me in front of everyone. I said, Grandma Ruth knew, Mom. Grandma Ruth met Daniel 8 years ago at a diner in Columbus. Grandma Ruth drove 2 hours by herself to meet him because you would not. Grandma Ruth sent him a card on our wedding day. Grandma Ruth baked him a pie every birthday for 7 years. Grandma Ruth was the only person in this family who ever treated Daniel like he was part of it. And she is exactly the reason I am not going to stand in this room one more minute and let you lie about him. I looked at Barbara Linton. I said, Barbara. I am sorry you were used. My mother picked you because she knew you would carry the story. I am not angry with you. Barbara's eyes had filled. She said, Hadley, I had no idea. Marlene, I had no idea. I looked at Pastor Holland. I said, Pastor, thank you for coming. Thank you for what you said about my grandmother. Pastor Holland nodded. He did not look at my mother. I turned to Daniel. I said, I'd like to go now. He said, okay. I looked one more time at my mother. She was crying into her hand. Carter was still not holding her. Presley was still frozen at the cake table, and her mouth was slightly open, and for the first time in my life I saw on my sister's face something that looked like shame. I did not speak to Presley. I did not speak to Carter. I did not speak to my mother. I took Daniel's hand. We walked out of the Millbrook Community Hall through a room of 42 people who parted for us the way a crowd parts for a stretcher. Melanie, my cousin, touched my arm on the way by. She said, Hadley. I'm sorry. I should have. I said, it's okay, Mel. And I walked past her. Outside, the September sun was still at that angle that made everyone look older than they were. The parking lot was full of cars with Ohio plates. Daniel opened my door. I got in. He closed it. He walked around and got in the driver's side. He started the engine. He did not pull out. He turned to me. He said, Hadley. I said, I know. He said, are you? I said, I don't know yet. Just drive. He drove. We got on the highway back to Columbus. I put my head against the window. Behind us, in that community hall, I would learn later, my mother had collapsed into a folding chair and wept, and Barbara Linton had sat down next to her, but Barbara had not held her hand. Barbara had sat 2 feet away and stared at the wall, and when my mother had reached for her arm, Barbara had gently moved it out of reach. Pastor Holland's wife had left within 15 minutes. The prayer circle had dispersed by 3. By Monday morning, the story going around Millbrook would not be the story my mother had planned to tell. The story going around Millbrook would be the story 42 people had watched with their own eyes. The drive back to Columbus was 2.5 hours. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on my knee. I did not cry. I watched the Ohio farmland go by outside the window, corn stubble and silos and white churches with small parking lots, and I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her flour-dusted hands teaching me pie crust when I was 8. I thought about the $100 she had slipped me at 16. I thought about the note in Daniel's wallet. I thought, over and over, about the things she had said to me in her kitchen the summer I was 24, the summer Daniel and I had first started talking about starting the business. She had said, flower on her cheek, Hadley, there are two kinds of quiet in a person. The quiet that is afraid to speak, and the quiet that is waiting to speak. Know which one you are, and know when to switch. I had thought about that sentence maybe once a year for 7 years. I had not understood it. I understood it now. We pulled into our driveway in Columbus at 5:45. Daniel turned off the engine. We sat there. He said, Hadley. I said, I'm okay. I am actually okay. And I was. I was not numb. I was not in shock. I was, for the first time in my adult life, not carrying a suitcase I had been pretending was a purse. The phone call started Sunday morning. Barbara Linton called first. She had gotten my number from Melanie. She cried on the phone for 10 minutes. She told me she had been friends with my mother for 43 years and she had not known what Marlene was capable of until she watched it happen. She asked if she could apologize to Daniel directly. I put her on speaker. Daniel sat on the couch next to me and he listened to Barbara Linton apologize to him for something she had not done, and he said, gently, Barbara. You were the tool, not the hand. Thank you for calling. Take care of yourself. Barbara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Hadley, honey. Your grandmother Ruth was my friend for 60 years. She would be so proud of you. I just want you to know that. I did cry then. I cried for about 90 seconds. Daniel held my hand. Then I thanked Barbara and I hung up. By Sunday night, 11 people from Millbrook had called or texted. Pastor Holland called on Monday morning to tell me he had spoken with my mother and that he was encouraging her to seek counseling. He did not ask me to forgive her. He did not ask me to come to a mediation. He just said, Hadley, I want you to know that what happened on Saturday was not your fault, and it was not handled by you inappropriately. I am saying this as a pastor and as a man who has known your family a long time. Take care of your marriage. Take care of yourself. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time and I did not do anything. Carter called me on Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. He called again on Wednesday. I let it go to voicemail. He called a third time on Thursday afternoon, and I picked up. I said, Carter. He said, Hadley. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it without interrupting. I said, okay. He said, I have known your mother for 26 years. I have watched her do small versions of what she did on Saturday for most of those years. I stayed out of it. I told myself it was not my place because you were not my biological daughter and I did not want to overstep. That was a coward's reasoning, and I knew it was a coward's reasoning, and I used it anyway. I am sorry, Hadley. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am telling you that I know what I did. Or rather, I know what I did not do. I said nothing for about 15 seconds. Then I said, Carter. Thank you for saying that. He said, your mother is not well, Hadley. She has not left the house since Saturday. Presley and Beau went back to Florida on Sunday night. Presley told your mother before she left that the engagement was off and that she was moving out of Beau's house. I closed my eyes. I said, is Presley okay? Carter said, I don't know. She would not talk to me. She said she is going to stay with a friend in Jacksonville for a while. I said, Carter. If Presley wants to call me, she can call me. Carter said, I will tell her. He paused. He said, Hadley. For what it is worth. Daniel is a good man. I have known that for 7 years, and I never said it out loud. I am saying it now. I said, thank you, Carter. We hung up. I sat on the couch in our living room and Daniel came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea, and I told him what Carter had said, and he said, that took him 26 years. Better late than not at all. I said, I don't know if I forgive him yet. Daniel said, you don't have to know yet. The consequences for my mother were quiet and complete. She stepped down from the Wednesday prayer group at the Methodist Church 2 weeks after the memorial. She resigned from her women's circle the same week. Barbara Linton did not call her back. Pastor Holland's wife did not call her back. The women who had stood in that circle around her at the coffee urn did not call her back. Carter told me on a later call that Marlene had taken to spending most of her days in the garden. She had stopped going to the grocery store because she did not want to run into anyone. It was not a grand fall. It was the quiet, permanent re-ranking of a woman who had spent 40 years building her entire identity around being Marlene Voss, pillar of the community, mother of successful daughters, and who had, in one sentence at her mother-in-law's memorial, shown Millbrook exactly who she actually was. Nobody shunned her. Nobody had to. The town just, in its slow Midwestern way, stopped seeking her out. She still got Christmas cards. She just got fewer of them. Presley called me 3 weeks after the memorial. She cried on the phone for a long time. She apologized for things she had not done and for things she had done. She told me she had known, since she was about 16, that our mother treated us differently, and that she had told herself for years that she was not complicit in it because she had not asked for it. She said she was in therapy now, in Jacksonville, twice a week. She said, Hadley, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to tell you that I see it now. I said, Presley. Thank you for calling. I am glad you are in therapy. I would like to hear from you again when you are ready. She said, okay. She did call again. 3 weeks after that. Then again a month after that. We are, slowly, becoming something that might someday be sisters. Daniel and I went on with our lives. The business had a record 4th quarter. We hired 2 more employees in January. I started sleeping through the night again, which I had not done in a long time, not even before the memorial, and I had not realized I had not been doing it. I started a small Saturday morning routine of making pie crust. I would take out a mixing bowl and flour and cold butter, and I would work the butter into the flour the way my grandmother had taught me, and I would not overwork it, and I would think about her. I made an apple pie for Daniel's birthday in March. He ate 2 slices standing at the kitchen counter and he said, Ruth would be proud, and he kissed the top of my head, and he went back to work in our home office. I framed Grandma Ruth's note, the one she had sent Daniel on our first anniversary. The one about Thai food. I hung it in the hallway between our bedroom and the office. Daniel walks past it every morning on his way to make coffee. There is a thing I did, once, that surprised me. In February, 4 months after the memorial, I drove to Millbrook alone on a Saturday. I did not tell my mother I was coming. I drove straight to the cemetery on the west edge of town. I brought a small pot of yellow mums because they had been my grandmother's favorite. I sat by her headstone for about an hour. I talked to her out loud. I told her what had happened. I told her I had finally understood the thing she had said about 2 kinds of quiet. I told her I was sorry I had not understood it sooner. I told her Daniel was good, and the business was good, and the marriage was good, and I was good. Then I did something I had not planned to do. I drove from the cemetery to my mother's house. I parked across the street. I did not get out. I sat in the car for maybe 10 minutes, and I watched her front porch. The porch swing my father had hung before he died was still there. The pot of mums on the top step had not been watered in a while. Carter's car was in the driveway. Marlene's car was in the driveway. The kitchen light was on. I did not go up to the door. I did not knock. I just sat there, and I looked at the house, and I thought about the little girl I had been in that house, the practice child, the quiet one, the one who did the dishes without being asked. And I thought, I forgive you, kid. You did what you had to do to get out. Then I started the car, and I drove back to Columbus. I have not been back to that house since. My mother has sent me 3 letters. I have read all 3. I have not responded to any of them. Daniel asked me once, in April, if I thought I ever would. I said, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. I am not going to force myself to be ready before I am ready. He said, good. We have made our own family. Daniel's 3 sisters and his mother had taken me in years before the memorial, but after that September, they closed around me the way a hand closes around something precious. Daniel's mother Ellen called me every Sunday for 6 months. His sister Rhea sends me photos of her kids every week. We spent Thanksgiving in Illinois at his parents' house. We spent Christmas in our own house in Columbus. We invited Grandma Ruth's old neighbor Mr. Grady, who was 91 and living alone, and he came and ate with us and told stories about my father. It was the best Christmas I had ever had. What I understand now, 6 months later, is something I could not have said out loud at 23, or 27, or even 30. The family you are born into is not a contract you owe. It is a first draft. What you do with your adult life, with the quiet parts of yourself that have been waiting to speak, with the people you choose to share a table with, that is the real document. My grandmother knew that. My grandmother had been telling me that for 20 years. I just needed to get to the room where it made sense. I did not win anything at that memorial. I did not destroy my mother. I did not get a ceremony or a trophy or a public apology. What I got was my own voice back, and Daniel's hand in mine in a quiet car on the drive home, and a pie crust on a Saturday morning, and a grandmother who I finally heard. There are 2 kinds of quiet in a person. The quiet that is afraid to speak, and the quiet that is waiting to speak. For 31 years I was the first one. Now I am the second one. And that is the whole of what I have to tell you. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.